Alrighty. Welcome everyone to our fourth and final winter webinar series for 2026. My name is Jess Fernley. I'm with Gita Ricker and we're hosting our last webinar series for this year. I would like to first start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're all meeting today. I'm currently coming in from Wiradjuri country and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Today we're going to be talking all about training systems, canopy management and chill accumulation. And I've got three fantastic speakers from those different topics to talk to you today. I am going to have a Q&A after every single presentation, but if you have any burning questions or any thoughts, please feel free to pop them in the chat as the presentations are moving through. And then hopefully we can have some great discussion right at the end as well. We are going to be pretty tight for time because I'm trying to squeeze three presenters in today, but I really would appreciate it if we had some great discussion too, because that always creates for good content when you're reviewing at a later time as well. So this presentation will be recorded and we will be popping it up on our YouTube channel. So if you miss anything or want to revisit, you can jump onto that as well. So today we've got three speakers. We've got Ken, Steve and Shane. So Ken Breen is our first speaker and he's going to be talking about narrow orchard system work in Cherries. And Ken's all the way from New Zealand, working for Plant and Food New Zealand. And then Steve Shindigs is a director with Green Atlas and he's going to be talking about the Cartographer. So if anyone's been to AgVic before and seen the Cartographer at the Smart Farm, Steve's going to be talking all about the use of a Cartographer in apples and cherries and some of the work he's been doing in Chile with the growers over there. And then Shane Phillips is going to finish up our webinar today. He's a head chemist at BioCentral Labs and he's going to be talking about why chill drives crop potential and what you can do about it, which is very topical at the moment given where we are with our chill portions in some of our more warmer regions. So I'm going to stop sharing and pass on to Ken and he can kick off.
Okay, let's do this and then this, and I think we're ready to go. Is that right?
Awesome. Yep. Ken, looks great.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Thanks for the invitation to be part of what you're up to this afternoon. Yeah, and we've recently changed our name from Plant and Food to Bioeconomy Science Institute. So same people, just a different name. So that should avoid the confusion there. I want to talk, yes, a little about narrow orchard systems, but more about orchard systems in general, and particularly this whole discussion that's going on around intensification. Talk a little bit about history and then where we are and where we may end up. And why is this not advancing? There we go. So a bunch of work over a number of years involving a lot of people, and some of those names there you'll probably recognize. So if we start with some history and we go back a long time to 400 BC, there was a philosopher, I guess, Palladius, who did a lot of work in horticulture and animal science and wrote 14 books, in fact. And just to illustrate how far we've come in some areas, when he talked about pest control and talked particularly about managing worm infestations in apples and peaches, he suggested for apples you could use a mixture of hog's dung mixed with human urine. If you ran out of those ingredients, you could always use bullock's gore. In pears, it was rather easier. You could use ashes mixed with armurca, which is the dregs of the olive processing industry. You could mix those, that would work. Or you could use ox urine mixed with vinegar, but you had to get the ratios correct for that. Fortunately, we've moved quite a long way since then in pest control, but in fruit thinning, we haven't really. We still do hand thinning, and Palladius talked about if there was a large number of fruit on the tree, you could remove the excess, particularly the faulty ones, as he called it, and that would improve final yield. So in some areas, we've moved a long way. In other areas, we're still doing a similar thing. And what I wanted to talk about specifically was how this change has happened in orchard systems, particularly intensification, and the areas that lie behind this, like the light interception and that kind of thing. So by illustration, then in cherries, if we look at what cherry trees look like on the left in the Michigan, North American forests, they're massive trees with very little hope of harvesting anything if you want it. 60 years ago in the UK, trees were significantly altered, although some of the health and safety challenges would be under scrutiny if we were trying to do that at the moment. Shift to nowadays, and we're talking about planer systems, possibly very narrow canopies, narrow orchards, small trees, high density of trees per hectare. And we could have the same discussion if we were talking about apricots. We can have the same discussion in olives and pistachios. We've been doing work for a decade or so on similar conversations, mainly in almonds, but also in other tropical crops. And we're talking about intensification and efficiency. And here we've been shifting from traditional production systems to greater densities. And there's even interest in the industry now on these super high density orchard systems. And it's all about production increase and efficiency. And to illustrate this, if we, for example, just talk about apples in the Netherlands over the last 100 years or so, we can see that as tree density has increased, there's been an increase in yield. And with this, over the same period, there's come an increase in labor efficiency. And that's the economics here is kind of the driving force behind all of this. We're going to have the same discussion in New Zealand with apples, although this image on the left and one on the right are not New Zealand photographs. You could have seen the same pictures in New Zealand. And over the same period, the last 100 years or so, we've had a massive increase in yield. And part of that story has been a shift in the type of tree that's occurred. And you can see particularly how the trees have become a lot smaller over the period, and the amount of wood in the trees has declined significantly. The tree form has changed. The trees per hectare, the density has increased profoundly, although recent work has suggested we don't need necessarily to go to the same density of trees. More on that shortly. Lying behind this, the thing that has made this possible is firstly the introduction of clonal rootstocks, and then shortly thereafter the use of dwarfing clonal rootstocks. And one thing I just want to point out to you is we talk a lot about intensification. We think when we talk about that we mean more trees per hectare. But if we change that conversation and talk mostly about light interception, we can see that over a similar period, we've had a massive increase in light interception. And if we imagine intensification as a discussion around increasing light interception in the orchard, it may not necessarily equate to more trees per hectare. Part of the story too has been the change in precocity, or the reduction in the number of years before these plants come into production. In this whole thing, there's a basic physiological principle, and that's related to photosynthesis. In other words, light it's a basic function that regulates productivity in these orchards, yield in these orchards. And associated with this, with yield, in our orchards are two basic properties. The first is that yield is related to whole orchard light interception, the amount of light that the whole orchard captures as opposed to getting lost to the ground. And secondly, the amount of light that penetrates the canopy, how productive the whole canopy is. Both of these are functions of the design of the orchard and of the canopy, and also the way we manage the canopy and the orchard. So the design and management of our orchard systems and the technology that we use to support that must be based on these principles. And if we have a look more at the first principle, in other words, energy intercepted equals gross yield, this is work that was done 25 years ago now in apples, showing that the yield of fruit was related to the amount of light that the orchard intercepted. It was actually based on work that was done in the 70s on other crops. And there are two lines here. One is Royal Gala and the other is Braeburn and Fuji. The later seasoned, higher, greater sized fruit generally has a higher production, conversion line. The limiting factor in all of this is that currently in our three-dimensional orchard systems, our row width and therefore the loss of potential light interception is affected by our requirements for vehicle access in the rows and the fact that three-dimensional trees have to be wider spaced to get penetration of light into the bottom of the canopy. We'll talk about that shortly. We also know that these lines can be shifted if we change our management. So for example, this line for Gala can be shifted if we change the management of these trees. And if we use this process called precision crop management, if we're focused on managing the trees in a way that increases penetration of light into the canopy, we know that this increases the productive volume of the canopy. So for example, in these almonds, there's a lot of unuseful dead space in the bottom compared with these. And we know if we do that, this process increases the uniformity of flowering and of fruiting. It reduces vigor, so less pruning, and it increases punnet or carton yield. These, if we look at this, we'll look at cherries shortly, but if we look at apricots as an example, both the size of the fruit on the left and the quality of the fruit, of individual fruit, is related to the light that is present wherever those fruit are present in the canopy. So areas of the canopy where there's little light compared with areas where there's a lot of light, a very strong relationship to size and quality. Unfortunately, though, we're not particularly good in our current tree design in managing the evenness of light distribution. So we're pretty good at the light availability in the outside of the canopy, not so good in the middle of the canopy, and this causes variability in flowering and in fruit set and in fruit quality through the canopy. This affects the way we manage the canopy. It affects our harvesting, and it ultimately affects the fruit in the punnet and the fruit on the table for the consumer. And if you will excuse my lack of artistic talent for a moment, and just imagine that these are three rows of trees. We're looking down the row with the inter-row alley between the canopies. These trees obviously cast shadows which move over the day. If we were purely just, without changing the design of the tree, just to move the trees closer together, we'd end up quite quickly in a situation where we've got some challenging issues with light. And that's generally why we limit ourselves to this ratio of height to row width of about 1:1. So we've been looking at ways of altering this and how we can manage this differently, other than particularly precision canopy management. And one of the other ways we've been looking at is these plane accordance systems, where we've altered the shape of the tree and to give us very narrow canopies that are very porous, which allows light to shift through the canopy. So 3 meters between trees and very narrow row spacings. And we've been working on a number of different crops for a long time now, and we'll talk a little bit about results in a moment. The shift in technology here is not actually the design of the tree. We know that these espalier type systems have been recorded in Egyptian documents. We know that the paintings of trees like this being grown on the sides of abbeys all the way through Europe for thousands of years. 300 and whatever that is, 50 years ago or so, Charles Cotton in a book that he wrote talks about very clearly about the value of these espalier systems. They're esteemed above all other ways of planting because of their beauty. He's talking about formal English gardens, the perfection of their fruits, the quality of their fruits, particularly size and color, and the abundance of flowering. So this is not new knowledge, and he relates it to the fact that these trees are grown in what he called the open air. We know that it's possibly not necessarily only the air, but largely to do with the light environment in these canopies. And if we use, we'll talk about cherries shortly, but if we use apples as an example in these systems, and we look at the light environment on a sunny day and on a cloudy day, and different positions in the canopy. This is the outside of the canopy, the top light blue line. And if we have 4 zones in the canopy, if we just focus on the orange line, which is 0.5 meter above the ground in a 3.5 meter tall canopy and 1.5 meters between the rows, we can see that even at the bottom of the canopy, there are periods during the day that you can get significant light in that part of the canopy. And that's because as the sun moves, it shifts through these holes in the canopy, and as a result, you get really even fruit size, fruit color, and internal fruit quality through these canopies. If we look for a moment just on cherry planer systems in narrow rows, and we're going to see a couple of fairly complicated slides here. Don't bother to read all of the data. I'll lead us through it. Yeah. We're talking about 2 row spacings, 1.5 and 2 meters between rows. And we're looking at light sensors at 4 positions in the canopy from the bottom to the top. These numbers are a figure we call daily light integral, which is a mean value for the total amount of light that was received at each of these positions over the day. We're talking about sweetheart cherry here. There are 2 things that we can see quite clearly. Firstly, and probably not unexpected, as you go down the canopy from the top to the bottom, you can see that the light attenuates through the canopy. There's less light at the bottom than at the top. We can also see that there's less light in the 1.5 meter row spacing than in the 2 meter row spacing. The question then is, how has this affected flowering and fruit set? and fruit quality. And we just particularly keep an eye on the bottom here, the bottom of the 1.5 meter and the bottom of the 2 meter row spacings. So this is the fruit number in each of those positions. And we can see that, although not significant, it appears that we've got a lower fruit number in the bottom of these canopies, and certainly seems obvious in the 2 meter canopies. So we've had less light at the bottom of the canopies, and that's affected the number of fruit we've got in the bottom of the canopies. But let's look, if we talk about fruit quality, and this is just the 1.5 meter row spacings, this is soluble solids and this is fruit size. Despite the fact that we had fewer fruit and less light, it hasn't impacted the fruit quality or the fruit size in the 1.5 meter spacings. In the 2 meter spacings, there's some suggestion down here that we may have had an impact, but no effect on soluble solids or fruit size. What's really happened here is that although we've got reduced fruit numbers, in the bottom of the canopy, the reduced fruit numbers have actually allowed an increase in fruit quality. There's been more carbon allowed to go to those fruit. And so what we've ended up with is uniform quality through the canopy, which has impacts on management and on harvest, and ultimately on the consumer, in the table in the consumer's home. When we shifted this to a commercial block of lapins, 85% of the export grade fruit were of large size. It has a huge impact on return. So that's work we've done up to now. We're working on some next steps, asking similar kinds of questions in the Narrow Orchard Systems program, a Hort Innovation program. So keep your eyes open for updates from this. Here we're particularly interested in the amount of growth, annual growth that's allocated to fruit. Similar questions to previously. How does the number and spacing of upright shoots affect light transmission? How does this affect flowering and fruiting, especially at the base of the shoots? And how does this affect fruit quality? In other words, do fewer upright shoots reduce fruit number, but this is compensated for by improved fruit size and quality? And we'll be we're working on a commercial block of lapins. We're talking about 2 treatments, 25 centimeter spacing of uprights, or 12 per tree, 30 or 10 per tree. It doesn't sound like a big difference, but it's about 17% more space and more light. We'll be measuring various things, obvious things like shoot development, fruit quality and size, light interception over the next few years. We're doing similar work in pears at Cherries as a model crop as well. So final points, our industry has been under kind of continual change for millennia. We've always had challenges and worked out ways to get over them. And the success of our industry really depends on our ability as orchardists, technologists, scientists to manage this change, especially those areas that we can manipulate in our favor. Intensification, particularly if we're talking about light interception rather than tree number, does offer some opportunities here, and especially when we connect it to other changes like data, robotics, automation. We'll hear a little bit more of that kind of thing from Steve with Green Atlas stuff shortly, I imagine. So that's all from me, and yeah, thank you for your time.
Ken, that was really interesting, especially the little history lesson at the start. Thinking about what they did back in the day. It makes you realize how long fruit production has been around for as well. We did have a comment in the chat around, just Andrew before he ducked off, was that there has been some work with TIA looking at 2D and 3D cherry systems a few years ago, and he was just asking if maybe that's worth chasing up and distributing again. So we might have a look at that, but I think yeah, all there's so many different areas of this 2D, 3D, a lot of work in the States. You guys have done work in the narrow orchard systems now, and a lot of information out there. So if you're interested in this work, I think going for a bit of a deep dive and having a look at what is out there is really handy, because it is the one area that work is being done in, and really good work. I'm just wondering if anyone has any questions for Ken before we pass on to Steve. If you do, feel free to raise your hand or pop in the chat. Otherwise, we can, if you want to hang on till the end as well, we will take some questions. I've just got a quick one, Ken. That cherry orchard that you're working in, is that in Australia or is that one in New Zealand?
In New Zealand, in Central Otago.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it'd be great to be able to see the system. But I guess AgVic have also got a similar setup, haven't they, at the Tatura Smart Farm?
Yes, which is younger, and there's some commercial blocks in certainly in the Shepparton area, which are also younger. One of the reasons why we chose this block is that it was obviously easier access for our guys, but also it happened to be one season older
Cool.
than the others. So we get data 1 year quicker.
Yes. Ahead of the game.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, if there's no further questions for Ken, thank you. We'll pass on to Steve from Green Atlas, if you wanted to share, Steve. And then, if you have any other questions for Ken, please pop them in the chat and we'll answer them at the end.
Okay. Hopefully everyone can see my screen now.
Yep. Looks good.
Let's come through. All right. Excellent. So thanks for the opportunity to present. It's actually a presentation I gave maybe a month or two ago in Orange, so apologies if anyone's seen it before. It was at that presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about apples as well as cherries. Jessica mentioned that might be of interest, but a lot of the concepts actually are the same, right, between cherries and apples. Green Atlas very much about getting data within the orchard and trying to help managers to make better decisions. So we don't make the decisions, but we're here to support. So we've been around for a while now as a commercial company, but before that, we worked in R&D through the University of Sydney, mainly for almost a decade, looking at applying robotics, computer vision to horticulture. And so Green Atlas was very much the result of having done all that research and trying to get it out there to growers. So we founded ourselves in 2018. Really, we only have one product, which is this thing that we call the Cartographer. You can think of it as a very fancy data logger, drives up and down your orchards, images what's in the trees. I'll show you a bit more on the next slide. So that's roughly what it looks like. We've got a few different configurations depending on whether the crops are overhead, like in kiwi fruit or table grapes, or if they're largely to the sides, for example, in cherries. So that's what it looks like. There's a camera pointing to the left, camera pointing to the right, a couple of very, very powerful strobe lights. So essentially we're doing flash photography. Each camera is taking a high resolution image 5 times per second, so 10 images per second. There's a laser on the back there that's taking essentially the 3D structure of the trees. And there's high precision GPS so that we know where all the data was taken from. This is kind of the basics of what we do. So we capture all these images, then we run them through a computer to analyze, well, what's in those images. So in this particular case, there's an apple tree. Here's in the middle, a zoom in on that location. The computer says, right, that's an apple, puts a red box around it. So even things that are quite well hidden, we're picking up and we're saying that's where the apple is. And we're essentially guessing the full extent of the piece of fruit. And then on the right, we're taking all of this information that we're getting all over the orchard and putting it into maps. The colors tell you how much of the thing is there. So a darker color says there's more of that thing, and a lighter color says there's less of that thing. So in this particular instance, you can see there's a couple of rows there that actually are very heavy in terms of fruit set. I actually don't remember for this particular block, but it's possible they're pollinator rows, a different variety entirely. And then you can see it's quite speckled, right? So you'd really like to see uniformity. I don't think we've ever seen a perfectly uniform orchard. So I mentioned, that we analyze images, but we also have this laser system. This is very much tied into the previous presentation where we're talking about light interception. We've actually done a lot of work with AgVic that show that some of the measures we can get with our laser sensor are very, very linearly related to the amount of light interception. So in this particular case, again, these standout rows, right, are darker. So they have a higher leaf area. That would typically be an indication that you've got low light interception in the center, particularly in the central part of those trees. And similarly, you can see, over here in the west, there's just less of this particular measure. So you can see here, the tree structure is just narrower, less vigor. And then, in this row that could be a pollinator row, the trees have been let grow into the interrow, so they're much more vigorous. And you would therefore expect that perhaps you might not get as much fruit set, not as much uniformity in flowering and so on. So what's the point of all this data? We're trying to solve problems, but really we have to work with growers and orchard managers. It's not our job to, if you like, solve the problem on the farm. Our job is to help solve problems. So you can see a whole bunch of things that we do around the world. In France, we do a lot of work in chemical thinning at flower time. We're looking to spray every tree a different amount of spray. There aren't many sprayers that are actually capable of doing that, but there will be. So those things are starting to come onto market in different parts of the world, very, very high precision sprayers. So the next step beyond per tree is going to be different heights in the tree. So different nozzles will be able to be controlled individually. And this kind of data enables that. We look at different diseases. So leaf roll virus in grapes. Grapes is one of the things that we do. Macadamia orchards, we look for infestations of weeds, so mistletoe in that particular example. But then also we do lots of the things that you would expect: yield estimation, maps to aid both chemical and manual thinning. We've got people that look at the tree vigor in order to think about how they might put fertilizer on the ground. So high vigorous trees, perhaps they don't need any additional fertilizer. Low vigor, perhaps they want to bolster the vigor during the season. But these are the kind of management decisions that we are trying to enable. So there's a bunch of things that we natively connect to, right? Because we think that really the next step is to, once you've got the data, is to start with automation. We always want to have a human okay the data just to sanity check that everything makes sense. But once you've done that, there's all sorts of things that you can do. So there's root pruning that we do and have done over several seasons in New Zealand. Again, that's a vigor management technique. There's smart spraying. We can interface to, I think we've got 6 or 7 different brands of sprayers that we can directly interface with now. There's smart spreaders. So putting out dry matter, fertilizer or other chemicals. Again, we've done some experimentation with those in Australia and in other places. And then in New Zealand, they've got this smart tagging system. And that's there. Once we've got the data, we've manipulated and said we want to do something here and not there. They're literally just spraying spray paint on the ground so that when the crews come in, they know where to do something and when not to do something, just in an effort to just make it very easy to make those on the ground decisions. So I'll just try to rush through apples, just talk about the kinds of things that we do there, and I'll try and get to cherries as quick as I can. But a lot of these concepts, as I mentioned, are very similar. So we do a lot of work. I'd say probably 60 to 70% of what we do around the world is to support thinning. So essentially fruit quality management. And the interesting thing that's happened there, both in larger fruits, but also in cherries, is that we typically started at the fruitlet stage and really to inform where and how much to do manual thinning. So literally thinning crews throwing fruit onto the ground. But as people have begun to trust that data more and more, they've wanted to pull back earlier in the season. So flowers, and before flowers, buds. So where is the fruit likely to be in the future? Because it's very much the first indication that you're going to have of how much potential yield is there going to be later on. So this is just an example map of mapping out apple buds. I'll show some nice examples in cherries a bit later. At flower stage, again, the same thing. We map, in this particular instance, we're mapping flower clusters, not individual flowers, because typically the grower is interested in thinking about how much fruit they would like to have on the tree and the fruit placement on the tree. So they really don't want to have more than one piece of fruit per cluster. So the clusters, again, are more of an indication of where they want to get to at the end of the season through the thinning process. And as I mentioned, we'll take these maps now, and in different places around the world, we have growers who are doing spray chemical thinning at this phenological stage. We can do very early fruitlet analysis. Again, so secondary thinners you might apply at this stage. We can also start to look at, and you can see in this case, a little bit more of analysis. So now we're looking at fruit per cluster, as well as just how many potential pieces of fruit are there going to be. And you can actually see in the right-hand side where we're looking at, progression flowers, sort of 1 month prior to fruit set. And then there was fruit set, 11 millimeters, but that was after a frost event. In this particular orchard, they were very interested in, well, what was the effect of the frost? So being able to look at the progression from flowering to fruitlets was really important for them. But then, interestingly, this concept of fruitlet per cluster actually presents quite a different map to the fruitlet map, right? So in some places, you are getting a smaller number of fruit, but what you are getting is more fruit per cluster. So in the end, you will end up with, if you thin to a certain number of leaves to pieces of fruit, so you get the right amount of light interception, you'll probably quite possibly end up with less fruit than you'd expect it to or would like to have. So here's, if you like, smaller, probably golf ball size fruitlets. These blocks are in Tatura, going through to, full, mature fruit. And at this point, once all the thinning's done, we can start doing things like a forward yield estimate. Here's just a quick example of the sorts of things that you can do. Now that you've got all this information and it's very high resolution, what else can you do? And this is just an example, I think, from Italy, where we're looking at doing essentially an insurance claim adjustment. there was a hail event, and they're interested in how much damage was there to the fruit. In this particular case, you can actually see that hail largely came in from the west, and you can see there's 2 rows of dots. The dots on the west are essentially looking at the canopy from one side, and the dots right next to it on the east are looking at the same canopy from the other side. And the fact that we're seeing dark blue right next to yellow means that almost all of the damage is on one side of the tree and not the other side of the tree. So we're getting very, very, if you like, high resolution data. So we can start to look for things like these tiny defects that were caused by the hail event. All right, cherries. So hopefully I'll go a little bit slower. I think I've got time. So cherries actually has been interesting. We can do almost all the same things that we did in apples, but really it's come down to 2 things, right, that people are interested in. Probably the thing that we do most of is early fruit set, and that's largely to inform thinning. So any cherry growers that we have on our books that are interested in growing very large cherries, not everyone is, but there are certain export markets where the size of the cherry is incredibly important for the price. And so we will image at fruitlet stage to inform thinning. Then flowers, pretty much no cherry growers, even though we have models of flower clusters for cherries, nobody's really using that on a commercial basis. There's a few people kicking the tires with flowers. But in all honesty, we do flower thinning in lots of other crops, but we've never had the same commercial interest in cherries. But what we're starting to see, particularly in Chile, and I think that's here, is pushing back now to the bud stage, because they consider thinning at bud stage to be the cheapest place to do it, given that there's going to be manual labor in the crop. Partly it's easier to just chop a branch off than pull lots of cherries off branches. So it's cheaper from that point of view. But also the concept is the tree will then put all of its remaining resource into the cherries that remain. So if you can set up the tree so that it produces the crop load that you want it to have, this is really what we're seeing from growers in Chile in particular. They see that as being the cheapest place to do that, and then there's just less thinning later on. So one of the things that they've done, which is actually different to apples, so they asked us to differentiate between bud sites. So you can see bud sites been identified in red here. Actually, we've done a lot of work since this image was taken, so the models are actually better now than they were. But they also asked us to identify what they call twig ends. So you can see these green boxes. And not being an agronomist, I don't want to go too far out on the limb here, but I believe the concept is really what they're identifying there is new wood. And the idea is that the new wood is going to be potentially more productive. You don't want to thin that or prune it. So they actually want to differentiate between essentially buds on new wood versus buds on older wood. But again, that's my understanding. Not being an agronomist, I don't want to hang my hat on that particular interpretation. But again, it just gives you a sense of what's possible, right, with tools like Green Atlas, like our Cartographer. So this is the kind of thing that we now do very, very routinely all over the world. Probably the primary thing that we do in cherries is very early stage fruitlet scan. So you've had fruit set, the fruit's small, visible. You want to go in quite early because you essentially the earliest you can go in, the more of the fruit that you're going to see, because the leaves are also growing at the same time that the fruit is. And then that's going to inform thinning. So we will often have our customers, they'll get a map like this one on the right. They'll take that map. We make them actually much prettier than that. Often we can do it as a grid. So a grid cell is just a tree. And then we'll have growers go into their crop. They'll look at a dark color tree and they'll say, right, we want the thinning crew to spend, I'm going to pick a number out of the hat, but let's say 20 minutes per tree. They might look at a medium color tree and say, right, 10 minutes thinning that tree, and then yellow or a light color. Don't worry about that tree, right? We're below the threshold that we want to be. So you just walk straight past that tree. So essentially it becomes a labor optimization problem, right? In terms of thinning. So we have a lot of cherry growers who are concerned about quality thinning. That's more or less how they would use the data in the field. So just, I guess, a quick point, right? How do you know that the data that we're giving you is valid, right? So we ask ourselves that question all the time. We're constantly doing experiments in the field. Lots of our growers do it. Lots of our partners do these same experiments, where we will produce graphs like this one, where what we're looking for is essentially a manual count. You can see that on the horizontal axis. For typically, it'll be a couple of trees. And then on the vertical axis, we've got, well, how many did the cartographer see in that same location? It's almost never the same number for a bunch of different reasons. Cherries in particular like to hide the fruit. But what we really want to see is that we get this nice linear relationship, right, where you can essentially fit a line that says there is a scale factor between the number that I see in an image and the number that are really there. And in almost every crop we've ever worked in, and it's a lot, we see this linear relationship. It only seems to break down when the bulk of the fruit is hidden from view, so you can't really inference what's there. So some of the crops that are like that, some of the denser macadamia crops are like that, and a couple of cherry varieties actually are also like that. But a more modern architecture, you tend to get results like this, where you can look at those heat maps and be quite confident that if Cartographer is saying 20% more, there is in fact 20% more with, just a little bit of noise. So that's essentially how we validate the data. So just a video, we kind of pride ourselves on going quickly. In a typical cherry or an apple orchard, we're probably driving 25 kilometers an hour through the orchard, or, the maximum safe speed that we can drive. So we like to get in and out very, very quickly. So that gives you a sense of how quickly you can gather this kind of data. In something like almonds, where the row spacing is wider, we can go even faster. So 40 to 50 kilometers an hour is definitely possible with a system like this one. All right, I'll leave it there. I think I saw a question come in.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. We do just around the identification of buds. So can the cartographer identify individual buds in a cluster or only the clusters?
Well, so at the moment, we are only identifying essentially the cluster of buds, right? We're not identifying each individual bud, certainly in cherries, right? So often you will get those little clusters.
Yeah.
We are trying to distinguish between bud sites that are likely to be vegetative rather than, to turn into fruit, right? So leaves versus fruit. it's, I would say, it's not 100%, none of this stuff ever is. But when we do the ground truthing, right, so we get people to manually count, that particular graph was a bud calibration graph. So even though it's not perfect necessarily, we do get this nice linear relationship that says you can still be confident that if we say more, there are more. If we say less, there are less. But yes, it's a cluster rather than a individual.
Yeah, it'll be interesting when you get to that vegetative versus floral stage, because I mean, even for people in my field of work, that would make our lives a lot easier than instead of clipping all the buds and looking at the percentages. But yeah, really good tool to be able to estimate crop load.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, and again, getting into the nitty-gritty, we rely, just like everybody else, we do rely a lot on averages to get accuracy. So you might go to an individual tree and say, oh, look, it's 10% out.
Yeah.
But if you look at it across 3 trees, it's going to average out to, a couple of percent.
Mm. Mm. Well, thank you. That was a great presentation. Steve's going to hang around, so if you have any other questions, please pop them in the chat or wait till the end. But thank you, Steve. I'll now pass on to our last presentation of this afternoon, Dr. Shane Phillips. And Shane is going to talk about chill accumulation.
Thank you, Ken and Steve, because so much was quite really interesting with this. Have I got everything up properly or not?
Yep, we can see that.
Beautiful. My interest in chill started way back in 2000 when I was up at Menindee and we were growing cherries there as an act of insanity. And from flowering to picking was 32 days, which was relatively quick. But out of all of those things, we found that chill was a real issue. And I was interesting, Jessica, you said about the lack of chill in certain areas. South Australia, probably through Mildura, Menindee, low chill. Griffith can be a bit low chill. And then you get into the cold areas once you go Swan Hill and east. So the thing is, how do we track it? And I know a lot of people use chill portions. I stayed with Richardson when I published, and the academics were saying, why wasn't I using chill portions? I said, I've got data measured exactly the same way since 2000. And I said, for me, it was that continuity of the same area. If I'm changing my modelling and our research program, I want to stay with the same form of remodelling. And I said, inevitably, if I use Richardson to chill portions, the denominator or the conversion I was quite comfortable with that. Now, when do things fail? I get erratic bud bursts, lopsided crops in our trials. We were seeing on north-south rows, I wouldn't have crop on the east side and I have crop on the west side and I have a heavier crop on the southwest side. And we started measuring temperatures of polymers, of temperatures of budwood, and we could see these differences occurring as the sun comes up in the morning, the buds get warm and I lose chill. And what's chill really? There's a couple of things. Buds must be dormant. And for me, this getting my tree into dormancy when they want to grow out. And that's a problem we've had this year in our area. We've had 300 mil of rain since March, our wettest year since 1912. Things wanted to grow on and they kept growing well into May, June. We've even seen some softwood in July. Has that been enough dormancy to satisfy it? And people look at models. I look at when does that tree go into dormancy as a really critical thing for me to satisfy my chill. It's been really cold this back end of the season, but now I've got pink bud. And as far as I'm concerned, buds are moving, chill's finishing up in our area. Goulburn Valley hasn't warmed up, it's different again. Each region's different. The lower chill regions, managing heat load into the budwood is one of the biggest levers I'm seeing on yield and quality. For us, and everything that Ken and Steve were saying about light is absolutely paramount. But when you get into a low chill area, how is this being influenced? So, and I've just mentioned here, we've got chill portions, hours below 10, which I don't particularly like, and Richardson chill, which is known as the Utah model. That's what we've got. Chill portions is very, very accurate, and that's what become dominant. But they have a similar thing between Richardson and the chill portions, whereas once I go below temperatures, I start losing chill. And once I get above certain temperatures, I'm requiring more chill. So this is where it all started. This is Menindee. And when people say there's an average year, there is no such thing as an average year. I measure every year on its merit, and I will make decisions accordingly. And for those of you who are using Dormex, I have gone on Dormex applications 8 weeks differently in the same orchard from one year to another. Because if you're looking at these figures here, oh my goodness me. And I was lucky enough in this year to go to a field day in the Adelaide Hills at Lenswood, and I saw crop failure in Pink Lady from a lack of chill. Doesn't happen in these cool climates very often, but it can happen. And I think the importance of measuring, as you can see this horrible graph of Menindee, how do we manage to this? How do we actually make sure I get my buds to go dormant? And for me, if I've got a tree that's still growing in this area and I've lost this a bit of chill, I never get it back. And the tree will start to wake up once the days get longer and temperatures get warmer again. So that's how we go. And if I look at what's happening this year and recent years, so we've got 26, 25, 24. This is Loxton, where I live, Renmark across the road. I've got Swan Hill, Griffith, way down, and Mildura way down. Goulburn Valley has a lot cooler than what we're seeing here, but I've just started adding more sites. As some people have asked me, can you look at other areas and how does it all compare? And it really comes down to the fact is how I manage an orchard here is different than this year. And you can see from year to year, the decisions I will make on how I manage, when I defoliate, when I want to waken the tree up. And this year's been really interesting. I had some lovely photos sent to me last week where a grower defoliated 3 weeks differently in his orchard on the same variety, on the same valve. The stuff he defoliated earlier is actually flowered earlier because it had the right amount of chill for that variety. And I think that's really important, knowing your chill hours. So comparing the sites as we showed before, look how late we were. It bounced around. We're looking in our region here. Really didn't get much happening until about here. Very light on. For me, my big crop years are when I get chill in April. If I get a cold April, I get early defoliation. That early chill, I've always said, early chill to me, best chill. Best is earliest. Problem I have if I've got low chill varieties, they want to wake up. I don't prune them, and I do not want to defoliate them. And we have varieties at 250, 275 chill hours. If I prune them, I'd have them flowering within a fortnight. Pruning will accelerate that event there. It's really interesting. So when I started getting into this, I was getting, we did research for an American company in chill accumulation where I'd whitewash the trees and it looked like they were in the snow. So you come to our orchard in Menindee and you think, oh no, I'm up in Mount Beauty or somewhere because the whole tree's covered in snow. We looked at calcium carbonate. I did zinc oxide coatings until I realised I was putting on 75 kilos a hectare of elemental zinc, which was like, it seemed like a good idea until I sprayed. I'm going, what am I going to do with all this? But it was costing me $1,000 a hectare to whitewash the trees to get the right amount of reflective coverage. So you look at reflection, conducting, making things evaporate. How do I keep my buds cold? But without it, I couldn't get a crop. So I had no choice. I had to pay the $1,000 to get the yield. I started then looking at polymers. And why was I looking at that? Enabling myself to get fine droplets over a tree. Polymer then holds water, and that water then doesn't freeze, and that then takes my losing of chill in the -1.5 degree or the -2.5 degrees. I can hold that above that temperature, but likewise, it takes longer as the evaporative cooling of night moisture for the bud to get over 16 and lose chill. I was lucky enough, got dragged into making snow in New Zealand in an indoor snowfield, and I'm going, oh my goodness, we were able to make snow at high temperatures, which proved the theory of holding moisture in a polymer or a nanoparticle, getting that. Probably a bit of a weird thing, but how does that make it for cherry, that's the evidence of saying I can do this sort of stuff. So we were running trials really for the last numerous years, and we were doing almonds, cherries, apples, stone fruit in our Swan Hill, Menindee through to the Riverland region, the area where I work. And importantly, I can never overestimate each season's different. Never farm to an average. Farm to the season. Make those decisions on pruning, on defoliation, on Dormex is very much a seasonal factor. I was speaking in the States on chill, and the only thing anyone wanted to talk to me was when I was putting on Dormex. And I thought, well, I probably don't go on the label. I can't tell you unless I'm leaving the country the next day. So there's that whole thing of the knowledge that you gain on your own farm, how critical that is in the system. So here's a shot of one of the orchards near home where we did chill the tree down, and exactly what Ken and Steve were talking about in light interception and chilling and bud movement and fertility. The untreated trees, smaller, flatter fruit, less crop load, these other trees, stronger budwood. And in our climate where I do get a lot of heat, I've got to get leaf out to protect my budwood going forward. And the other thing highlighting cherry outcomes, fruits per limb, east and west side, you can see I'm getting in some areas more fruit on these cooler parts of the tree compared to hotter parts. It varies from season to season, variety to variety. Know your chill by variety. What are you managing to? And so looking at so we're going back really this work over 26 years in this space, which suggests I need to get a life, Jessica, rather than just getting very anal about chill. But when you live in areas like Menindee and you're growing fruit, you start to understand that it's such an important part of how I manage. And it was interesting listening to, we've got a thin fruit, and going, I can never stick it back on a bough. I'd rather pull it off because I can never guarantee the season. And I think that's the other importance about managing and monitoring your chill, what it does in terms of giving you really high level management of potential setting. And when I've known I've had big years on, I'll just go, we were just doing hand thinning on buds or just some buds, doing a little machine pruning. Here's some really nice data where we've chilled and not chilled between Snow Princess and Carina. Carina was just one that we got great responses on in terms of setting. And that you think, oh, heck, what have you done there? Oh, my goodness me, 200 pieces of fruit per tree is not bad. If you've just gone and set 600, yeah, that wasn't great for the thinning budget. We sort of blew that out of the water. But again, if I go to Snow Princess, those yields are not enough. And it just shows you the importance or significance of variety by location. For me, in my area, I like getting my trees to go dormant by mid-May. I've always thought best chill, early chill. And I keep my orchard cold. This is in our region of the Riverland, Mildura, Menindee. I grow cover crops because I don't want my soils to get warm. Keep my trees cold. Also ensuring my wood doesn't grow out late, because that tree's been delayed. And once the daylight's, once like we are now, where the days are getting longer, trees are starting to wake up. I've gone down the polymer pathway because one, it's a lot easier, it's a lot cheaper to handle. It's just an easier thing to spray. The rates are a lot lower and really very effective in our region. And when do I target chill? This year was really interesting. Is that mid-July, normally we would get 18 to 22 degrees, quite warm. First, we didn't see it this year. Mid-July, we're lucky to get 16. So this year's season is so different than what we've seen in the past. And in 26 years, I've not seen this sort of year, which makes it interesting on where we're heading. Now, the other thing is, can I use polymers to hold back early flowering varieties, knowing that some of my early flowering varieties are gold for pollen? And we were starting to manage within a number of different crops that were cross-pollinated, my early flowering lines, if they crossed, would give me bigger fruit. And that was quite significant over a number of varieties. So I was thinking, oh, I want to do this. I don't want them flowering too early. Do I delay Dormex? Do I put polymers on to slow the flowering down? these were resulting in larger size fruits compared to my later varieties, which get me across the line. Do they give me better size? And the other thing is I only target Dormex. If you're a Dormex user, only once adequate chill's been obtained. I've seen too many times where people go out early before chill units or chill portions have been obtained. And yes, I get a bud out. Do I get a great piece of fruit? Not really. So what to take back to the orchard? Understand chill. What you measure is what you measure, and that's your data for how you read it. Measure what are our strategies, reflecting agents, polymers, or nothing, evidence that it works. We do a newsletter now, which started years ago when I started doing this, and it sort of got more interesting as we go through and seeing the different areas of where we're heading. So that's all for me done, Jessica. I don't know if anyone wants to have a chat about something, but that's my little brief on where we're at.
Thanks, Shane. That was I didn't know that about you, cherry grower in Menindee. So that was actually
that
very
was an act of
interesting.
insanity. Now I've got to get this slide down. What do I do here? I'm a techno klutz.
You should, up the top there next to the leave button, it should say unshare.
End event.
But no, don't end the event. I'll end it before all of it. Unshare, it should say. Yeah. But I might be able to hang on a second. I'll just do this and then I will stop share.
You've done an excellent job there.
Okay. But that was really, really interesting. And a lot of people are trying to look at different strategies around accumulating chill. And I know a few growers on the call and also who will watch the recording will find that presentation very interesting. I'm just wondering, is there efficacy in using some of this to cool the buds in post-harvest? Is that something that you've also looked at?
We're doing that in almonds this year with Carmel, specifically for non-infectious bud failure. But the other thing is really neat. Heat load in December, January on cherry bud will actually make while you have a doubling effect the following year. So we've got 2 trial sites looking at the role of polymer coolants in hopefully mitigating bud temperatures to reduce doubling of our buds. And that's really neat because I think once I get too many doubles, and again, where am I going to find doubles? Northwest corners of trees where my afternoon sun really belts it. We've seen it in some orchards where I can pick row orientation by bud out, and Steve's work with their monitoring would be really indicative of that. I think you'd be able to find chill variants within properties as well. So that would be pretty neat as well. So we're going down this pathway. I was doing work in citrus to reduce transpiration losses of water, and we spray on the premise of a 40-degree rainfall event. Oh, not rainfall, a 40-degree temperature event, knowing that the polymer lasts 4 weeks, but I can only afford to spray once a month. And then we picked all the fruit, looked fantastic in the bin. I've gone on holidays, come back, and they whacked all the fruit through the packing shed at the same time.
Oh, no.
But I said, that's what happens when you do collaborative research. But yes, we're going back with growers now where we're doing whole blocks for temperature mitigation in summer through packing sheds as well. So that's really neat.
You and I might have to talk online because I've been thinking about doing this concept here in New South Wales as well. But I'll talk to you about that.
Keep in touch.
Yeah. Has anyone got any questions for Shane? I know we're a little bit over time, so if anyone has any other comments or questions, make sure you sign up for Shane's newsletter as well. I know I did. But if we haven't got any questions, I want to say a big thank you to Ken, Steve, and Shane today for taking the time out of their day to present to you all. I hope everyone took away something interesting, and I really thank everyone for being involved over the last 2 months when we've been running these webinars. If, like I said, you want to watch any of the recordings, Geeta has popped them up on our YouTube channel, so we'll send out the link as well for this one if you want to go back and watch any of the presentations. And just a really big thank you to Geeta as well for all her organisation and putting all the links and getting us all here as well. So thanks, Geets. But we'll pull up stumps today. Again, thank you all, and I hope you all have an excellent Wednesday. Why did I say Monday? Wednesday.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank
Jess.
you.
Thanks, Geeta.
See you all soon.
Bye.